Well, hello there, and welcome to a special edition of Roundtable here on Telile Community Television. I'm your host, Adam Cook. If you're watching this broadcast right now, you're either preparing for, going through, or coming out of the aftershocks of Hurricane Franklin. Now, recent weather forecasts have noted that the track of the hurricane is moving towards the northeasterly part of the Atlantic Ocean, and that means it won't be landing in Atlantic Canada. However, with hurricane season likely to be much more intense with more numerous storm systems than last year, according to meteorologists and climatologists, we thought it would be a good idea to share some thoughts about hurricane preparedness and what to do if a hurricane or a large weather system such as the flooding that hit mainland Nova Scotia earlier this summer happens to arrive in your area. So we're going to share some thoughts about Hurricane Fiona from officials here in Richmond County, and also talk to a couple of people who had impact from Hurricane Fiona and needed to get the community rallying around them to help them recover. But we're going to begin with a special press conference that was held by the province of Nova Scotia this past Thursday, August the 24th. It featured officials from many organizations that have a stake in hurricanes and heavy weather systems, such as Nova Scotia Power, the Canadian Red Cross, emergency management officials from the provincial and municipal levels, and the minister responsible for Nova Scotia's Emergency Management Office, John Lohr. We're going to begin with him as we talk about hurricane preparedness in this season and in the weeks to come. So let's begin with the press conference provided to us by Communications Nova Scotia as we hear from the minister responsible for Nova Scotia's Emergency Management Office, John Lohr.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I don't have to tell anyone here we've seen a number of severe weather events this year, which have resulted in absolute tragedy. And for many, the recovery is still very much underway. From the extreme dry conditions that fed the wildfires in our province in May to the heavy rainfall and severe thunderstorms that triggered the tragic flash flooding events we experienced in July and August. From what I understand, and we'll hear a little more about this from Bob in just a moment, the season is shaping up to be an active one. I want to take this opportunity to let Nova Scotians know that we are aware. We're working together and preparing for the season ahead. And I would like to encourage all Nova Scotians to take some time now before a storm or weather warning is issued to our region to do the same. Before an event happens is a good time to sit down with your family and talk things over, check to see what may need to be done around your house or cottage, make a plan and prepare. And then if at some point a weather warning is issued for the area, you'll be ready. I've invited Nova Scotia's EMO, Nova Scotia Power, and the Red Cross here today to share a little about the work they have underway. But each of us has a role to play in planning for and preparing for storms and hurricanes. To help Nova Scotians prepare, we're launching an awareness campaign with tips, advice, and information that people can use to help protect themselves, their loved ones, and their properties this hurricane season. The messages and themes will be familiar. Stay up to date on the forecasts, have an emergency kit ready with enough water, food, and medication and supplies to last several days. Take steps now to ready your property by trimming trees and branches, clearing downspouts and drains. Check your insurance coverage. Gather together important documents and make sure you have a plan for your family should you be ordered to evacuate. The campaign will run for 4 weeks starting today and continuing throughout September. Ads and materials will direct Nova Scotians to our Nova Scotia Alerts webpage, where there's more information and resources to help people prepare. If there's anything we've learned this year, emergencies can happen quickly. We want Nova Scotians to be prepared. With that, I'll turn things over to Bob Robichaud for an update on what we can expect in this year's hurricanes forecast. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And first of all, welcome or thanks for inviting us to the briefing today. Je veux préciser en français que s'il y a des questions en français ou s'il y a des choses qui ont besoin d'être répétées en français, je peux certainement faire ça. Just want to go through kind of where we are so far in this hurricane season. So far, we're up to 9 named storms. One of those storms actually made it to hurricane status. And the average to this date is about 5 named storms 2 hurricanes and 1 major hurricane. So in terms of some of the named storms, we're a bit ahead of schedule of what the long-term average is for this date, especially on the weaker storms. On the stronger storms, not so much. We only had 1 hurricane, and the average is 2, and we haven't had a major hurricane as of yet. Back in May, we held a briefing to discuss the NOAA outlook for the 2023 season. They typically issue an update to those predictions in early August, and they did so again this year. And the numbers for this year are 14 to 21 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 2 to 5 major hurricanes. So those numbers are a little bit higher than what was discussed in May. It was a routine update of the predictions. So that kind of points things up towards a busy hurricane season, or an active hurricane season. These predictions are for the entire basin, so the entire Atlantic Ocean. It doesn't necessarily mean that a lot of those storms will approach Atlantic Canada or have any kind of impact on Nova Scotia, but we always have to be ready for that 1 or 2 storms that might actually impact us. And we saw that last year with Fiona. It was a perfect example of that, where we only had 1 landfalling storm in Canada, and one of them, the only one, in fact, was Fiona. So that's why we have to get prepared the same way every single year. From our perspective, in terms of where to get weather information, we think it's really, really important for folks to get weather information from a trusted source. There's all kinds of different weather opinions and weather Facebook sites out there where people are putting stuff out where it's not quite accurate. You can see that it's not necessarily provided by someone with some meteorological training. However, for us, the Canadian Hurricane Center, we have our website, we have our WeatherCan app that you can download on your mobile device, and of course our website that has all the information on any storms that may be approaching Canada. Not necessarily all the storms that are out in the Atlantic, but the ones that are affecting Canada. So with that, I'll wrap it up, and over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Bob. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Droper. I'm the storm lead for Nova Scotia Power, and we take our storm response very seriously. As Bob mentioned, we've seen more frequent and more severe storms over the last few years, culminating with Hurricane Fiona last year. And we understand how impactful storms are to all Nova Scotians. They have a big impact on the trees throughout the province and a big impact on power lines as well. And because of that, at Nova Scotia Power, we watch the weather every single day. 24 hours a day, we're watching the weather, making sure that we have a good understanding of what the impacts may be to our system when a storm is coming this way. And we do that 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. If a storm is forecast to hit Nova Scotia, we do preparation as far in advance as we have notification, making sure that we're bringing crews in advance, staging people throughout the province, and getting ready to respond as quickly as possible when the storm does impact the province. And when we do have a big storm hit the province, we do open our emergency operations center. It's staffed 24 hours a day until the storm is over and all customers are restored. We have experts and leaders from around the business in our emergency operations center, coordinating the restoration effort and making sure they're doing everything they can to get the customers back on as safely and quickly as possible. That emergency operations center is really focused on safety as well. Our number 1 priority at Nova Scotia Power is making sure that we have a safe response, both for our employees and for the public as well. If you do see a downed wire during a storm, please make sure that you notify 911 right away, and we'll send out a crew to move that wire and get the power back on as quickly as possible. It's important to stay away from downed wires and report those as quickly as you can. During a hurricane, if there is flooding in your home and you do have an impact to the water levels in your home, they rise above the electrical outlets, please make sure that you contact us right away, contact a certified electrician, and stay as far away from that water buildup as possible. Also, we ask everybody to utilize our outage map on a regular basis. We have lots of information on our website, as well as our outage map. Updated restoration times are on the outage map. Once we have more information when a crew arrives on site, we'll update those ETRs and put the most up-to-date information on our outage map. please make sure to check that on a regular basis during a storm, and we'll put the information there. Every storm that we experience does bring a different impact to the province. For example, with hurricanes and tropical storms, they do bring significant winds, which impacts the trees and ultimately causes outages. So we storm harden our system year round. We focus on vegetation management, clearing trees away from the power lines, so that if they do fall during a storm, they stay far enough away from our power lines so they won't cause an outage. Last year, we spent about 25 million on vegetation management. In 2023, we're ramping that up to be 32 million. And then going forward in 2024, we'll be spending over 40 million on vegetation management. We know that's the single best way to reduce outages throughout the province. And that's our focus at Nova Scotia Power, reducing the number of outages from trees in storms. After a storm, we also do a storm cleanup. We keep crews back in the province to patrol lines, visually inspect any damage that may have occurred. Any trees that may have been weakened during the storm, they may not have fallen during the storm itself, but they are weakened and may fall in future storms. So we go throughout the province, removing those impacted trees and making sure that there won't be an impact later on. After Fiona, we removed about 10,000 trees, and we continue to do that work right until today. And then finally, after every storm, we do a lessons learned debrief. We bring in all the experts that were involved in the restoration. We document everything that worked well and everything that we could do better going forward, making sure that we have a really good process in place to incorporate those improvements into future storm restoration going forward. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thanks very much. At the Canadian Red Cross, anytime that there is any kind of disaster, our responsibility is to provide for basic and immediate needs. When it comes to extreme weather events, the first need tends to be shelter. And in collaboration with municipalities and provincial officials, the Red Cross will open emergency evacuation centers in places like community centers or other accessible facilities. We work with partners such as the St. John Ambulance, Disaster Animal Response Team, and the Salvation Army to make sure that basic and immediate needs are met within that shelter, such as food, access to medications if you had to evacuate quickly, mental and psychosocial supports. As far as organizational preparedness, the Red Cross will pre-position supplies, so our cots, our blankets, our hygiene kits, and things like that in strategic areas around the province. So if someone requests a shelter open in advance, if there's good indication that people will have to evacuate, we can access our supplies quickly or after an evacuation has been ordered. As far as personal preparedness, and this is some repetition from previous speakers, but it does bear repeating. Now is the time to either update or create your home emergency preparedness plan. If you don't have one, you can visit redcross.ca/ready for a template to prepare your own emergency plan and kit. Your kit should include things that will make a stay away from home more comfortable for you and your family. Things like clothing, medications, if you have children, some toys and games. If you have pets, prepare a kit for them as well with a leash, some food, water, medications for them, a pet carrier, something great to have on hand. If you have a vehicle, make sure it's full of gas before the storm arrives, and it's always great to have some cash on hand. If you are asked to evacuate your home and have the time, it's a good idea to photograph the rooms, take videos of your possessions. So if you do have to launch an insurance claim, then you do have access to some visuals to share with them.
Okay, go to Jason next.
Thank you very much. Jason Mew, I'm with the Nova Scotia Emergency Management Office. Thank you very much for being here. Just want to reiterate to everyone here that EMO has been in contact with all our key stakeholders, such as Nova Scotia Power, Red Cross, and all the municipalities in Nova Scotia, just to make people aware that there is a hurricane that could possibly impact Nova Scotia. We're still obviously following that with Environment Climate Change Canada, waiting for their expertise on any kind of impacts from that hurricane or any other storm. Really important here is with reaching out to all our key partners. And, when we do have a requirement to activate our Provincial Coordination Center, we do, and we bring in all those key partners to help with the overall response throughout the province. So anyways, and just like Ansel said, asking those families to look and prepare a plan, be aware of how their municipality will be communicating with them during an event, and to follow any guidance that they receive from the municipality in regards to possible shelters or comfort centers or any other guidance during or after a storm. So thank you.
Okay, we'll now open the floor to questions.
Minister, what are you hearing from the telecoms about their preparedness for this hurricane season this year?
So I can tell you, yes, thank you for the question. I mean, we, as you know, post Fiona, we brought in legislation that required the telecoms to be present at the provincial coordination center, and since then, when required, they have been present. So they have stepped up. So I mean, in terms of that, we're satisfied with the telecoms. Obviously, there's a question with cell coverage and cell service, which is really something that is in part of a federal mandate, CRTC level. But clearly, we need better cell service and better cell coverage in the province.
It seems like the federal government so far taking the premier's letter about it and your concerns, it's kind of boiled down just to talking to the telecoms as opposed to getting the CRTC to actually have them do anything different. Are you disappointed with what you're seeing from the federal response?
Well, I mean, we'll that remains to be seen. I mean, this takes time, so we expect to see the federal government respond. Yes.
As part of your bill, the telecoms are also supposed to file emergency response plans of their own. Have they done that?
They have done that, and I don't know if Jason has anything to add to that. There's a requirement to keep those updated as well. So I don't know if we've got to the update point yet or not.
Municipalities.
Telecoms.
Telecoms, I mean, they have their own plan, and we certainly will have, we meet regularly with Bell and various other telcos to go over their plans and how we'd fit in. But it's been a huge step forward having them actually present in the provincial coordination center, because it's very, very important that our key partners are there in person. Just because if you lose telecommunications, we have people on site. And the nice thing about the provincial coordination center, we have other methods of communicating, whether it's through TMR2 or sat phone or other methods. So really having those key players in that room is really essential.
Were representatives of the telecoms invited there?
I actually don't know if they were invited here. I don't believe they were.
What is the province doing to be prepared for this hurricane season?
So there's a number of things that we're doing. Obviously, we're through EMO, we're communicating with our municipalities and through all the various departments. I mean, we've been through a fair bit already, and there's a fair bit that we do regularly to be ready for any emergency. And maybe I will just turn that question over to Jason as well.
Yeah. Our minister is correct. We do meet routinely. We offer training to municipalities, First Nations, and all police forces every 90 days. So every 90 days, we're in contact on how best to interact with Nova Scotia EMO and other critical partners. So yes, we do continue to do that and engage.
What's the current state of the province's infrastructure after the July floods?
Well, I think that as we can all see, if you just driving in on the 101 today, or, we can see that there's still more to be done. I know Public Works has done an incredible amount of work, and I do want to give a shout out to their staff. There's just been preparing since, getting things back to normal since those July floods has been an enormous amount of work. Clearly, there's more still to be done. And I think that you'd have to ask the Minister of Public Works specifically for an update on that. There was a lot of damage in those July floods to a lot of infrastructure that's not that easily or quickly fixed, and that would be a question for the Minister of Public Works.
Minister, with regard to those that you're mentioning of the floods, would the province consider purchasing damaged homes from the flash flooding that sit in the floodplains and are considered uninsurable, like the homes on Union Street in Bedford? Some people have petitioned for this. Is there any dialogue on this happening now?
So I did visit some of the homeowners there, and I mean, the reality is, looking at a home that was flooded right in front of me near the Sackville River, but then look up the hill, and up the hill homes are flooded as well. So I think the reality is we know where the federal government is going on their DFAA program for people who are vulnerable to flooding, and for all citizens in Canada, flood insurance will be available to anyone. It won't matter where you live. So we know that those homes, which are in very great locations normally, but suffer from periodic floods, will also be able to get flood insurance. So no, we're not considering purchasing those homes. We're working with them through the various programs to help them put their lives back together. And we know flood insurance will be available for them.
And follow up for the Red Cross. Thank you, Minister. Follow up for the Red Cross. It's been a tough year. Fiona, the wildfires, the floods. Now we're talking hurricanes again. And you can sense the people who will watch these news stories tonight tightening up after a pretty tough year. Do you have any thoughts on people being more prepared because of the year we've had, or maybe fatigued and weary and not properly prepared to get hit one more time? Do you have any thoughts on how that plays out psychologically?
I think it's a little bit of both. We've had several requests from community groups, municipalities, and organizations for our Be Ready presentation, which is our general preparedness presentation. So we've seen an increase in requests for that. We also we started receiving calls already for any potential impacts of Fiona. Where might we set up a shelter? Where might people be able to get supports? Speaking personally, I have my own anxieties for this current storm season. So I do anticipate that, yes, people will be a little bit more on edge. And I do believe and hope that lessons learned and observed for organizations, municipalities, and individuals will lead to seeing people more prepared for the storm season.
Monsieur Robichaud, qu'est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire pour la tempête Franklin, les impacts potentiels ici à ce point-ci?
Premièrement, c'est très tôt, mais Franklin, à l'heure actuelle, est une tempête post-tropicale, située à peu près 1200 km au sud-ouest des Bermudes. Se déplace vers le nord-est, mais on s'attend que la tempête va virer un peu plus vers le nord avant d'approcher la côte est du Canada, probablement la semaine prochaine. Ça devrait entrer dans notre zone d'intervention, je pense, début de la semaine prochaine. La tempête est prévue de devenir un ouragan, le deuxième ouragan de la saison. La plupart de nos modèles nous montrent une trajectoire qui reste plus au large, donc peut-être pas de gros impacts dans le nord des provinces maritimes. C'est trop tôt pour parler du sud des provinces maritimes, puis certainement pour Terre-Neuve et Labrador, c'est possible que la tempête s'approche de cette province-là. Mais de parler d'impact spécifique, c'est encore très tôt.
Et le fait qu'on n'a pas eu encore de grosses d'ouragans, là, vraiment comparé aux autres années, est-ce que ça devrait rassurer les gens? Est-ce qu'ils devraient quand même prendre des risques?
Non, nous autres, on avise les gens de se préparer de la même façon à chaque année, malgré les prévisions, malgré ce qu'on a eu jusqu'à date. On se souviendra l'année passée, à ce temps-ci, le 24 août, on avait 3 tempêtes nommées, on est rendu à 9. Donc, on est beaucoup plus avancé qu'on était l'année passée du côté des tempêtes nommées. Notre premier ouragan, c'était pas avant le mois de septembre. Puis l'année passée, on sait ce qui s'est passé avec Fiona. Donc, ça peut arriver n'importe quand. On a eu des grosses tempêtes dans le mois d'octobre et dans le mois de novembre même. Ça fait que la saison s'étend jusqu'à la fin novembre. Il faut être prêt pour ces genres de tempêtes-là jusqu'à la fin de la saison.
Bob, before we continue, could you give us summary in English as well, please?
Yeah, just a quick update on Franklin, because I know a lot of people are asking about Franklin. Franklin right now is about 1,200 kilometers to the southwest of Bermuda. It is a tropical storm, and it's moving northeastward. We do expect that the storm will gradually take over a more northerly track probably over the weekend, and it's also expected to become a hurricane on the weekend, even reaching Category 2 status right now. That's what we're looking at. We expect that the storm should enter our response zone probably early next week, followed by another turn towards the northeast, so another right-hand turn. That right-hand turn is going to be very critical in determining if the storm tracks closer to the Maritimes or a storm that brings it, the turn is a lot sharper, it might keep the center of the storm offshore. So right now, we can't really determine how sharp that turn is going to be. That's what we're watching over the next few days as to how that's going to play out. Most of our forecast models right now keep the center of the storm south of the Maritimes. Newfoundland is still in play for a landfall, but as of right now, everything is still kind of on the table. One thing is we're not necessarily looking at another Fiona type scenario. Most of the models don't have the storm that strong by the time it gets here, but any storm this time of year is one that we have to watch very closely.
Thank you.
Going back to the telecom, I understand that you said that it falls under the CRTC, but is there anything at all that the province can do ahead of hurricane season, to ensure that folks in these rural communities are able to call 911, able to communicate with their families, able to get emergency alerts?
So, I mean, well, obviously ahead of the hurricane season, we're asking people to prepare to think about that. So, I mean, obviously for individuals in rural parts of the province, that means being prepared to have backup power for their cell phone charging, whatever that looks like, to have gasoline in their tank of their car, to do things like that. So there's a number of things Nova Scotians can do. As far as the province goes, I mean, it's very difficult for us to change the arrangement of cell phone towers or step into things like that, but we certainly want to put, we're communicating all the time to our EMOs centers and our municipal partners, and all of the things that we can do to be ready, we will be ready.
Are you doing anything pushing the federal government, to improving service in those rural communities? Because there was folks on the Eastern Shore after Fiona that didn't have reception for about 30 days. There are folks in West Hants who didn't receive emergency alerts during the flooding.
So, as you may recall, after Fiona, we did introduce a bill in the legislature requiring the telecoms to be present at the provincial coordination center. So if there is an incident this hurricane season that results in power outage, we'll be able to have direct communication with them. As Jason has said, that will speed up the recovery process, will help us direct where to put our resources to see that those communication towers are reconnected with power, or if that's the case, or put back together. So we are working to have a much closer relationship with our telecoms, and they are stepping up in terms of that emergency preparedness side, or being at the provincial coordination center.
We do have some questions on the phone, so we'll move there now. We have Callum Smith with Global. Go ahead, Callum, with your question.
Thank you. My first question's for Mr. Robichaud. Mr. Robichaud, can you just talk about how susceptible Nova Scotia is with our current vulnerabilities, such as down trees from Fiona and the water levels? Where do things stand if Franklin was to make any form of landfall in Nova Scotia?
Well, in terms of vulnerability, maybe EMO would be in a better position to talk about that. In terms of where we are, obviously, we've had a tremendous amount of rain here in Nova Scotia over the last, since early June. In some areas, just around the Halifax area, I was just looking the other day, we had about 250 millimeters of rain from June 1st to mid-August last year. This year, it was closer to 700 to 800 millimeters, which is way more than what we had last year. I mean, it's all over the news about how farmers are having difficulties getting their crops, and we know that the ground is wet. We know that everything is saturated. So a hurricane bringing a lot of rainfall obviously is not something that we want at this time of the year. But unfortunately, heavy rainfall is one of the hazards that we see with these types of storms. So that certainly would not be a welcome impact to Nova Scotia.
Callum, do you have a follow-up question?
I do. For Minister Lohr. Minister, I'm wondering how you plan to communicate with Nova Scotians, what methods you're going to be using, or emergency alerts, or are those would those be utilized if there was a threat to Nova Scotia from Franklin or other storms, and what other methods would you be utilizing?
So thank you, Callum. In terms of this current awareness campaign, we're planning to have print, radio ads, and social media. In terms of an actual event, we would communicate through emergency alerts.
Okay, next we'll go to Luke Diamond with the Cape Breton Post. Go ahead, Luke.
Hi there. Question for the minister and perhaps Mr. Mew as well. I'm reporting from Cape Breton, which took the brunt of Fiona last year, and consequently, a lot of people are still reeling here. Is that being considered in the distribution of help and other storm-related resources ahead of the hurricane season?
I think that what I can say is that whatever does happen, we will respond in the area it does happen. I mean, we're prepared to help wherever it's needed in Nova Scotia. So certainly very aware of the impacts Fiona had in Cape Breton and really across northeastern Nova Scotia, severe impacts, and we've responded to that. We continue, I mean, Fiona continues to be an area of concern for us too, and continue to respond. So wherever the event is, I think that it's fair to say that we will respond. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Jason, or not.
Sure, I can add to that. So we did have a large exercise in the Cape Breton area just last year, just going over some lessons learned from past events. So we'd be really looking to the municipalities and their emergency management coordinators to put that preparedness in place, to look at anything that they might have to try to mitigate before any future storms.
Okay. Luke, do you have a follow-up question?
I'd want to check in with Mr. Drover as well from Nova Scotia Power. Similar question. Is there, seeing the devastation last year from Fiona, are you predicting any more adverse impacts in places that have already been hard hit in recent hurricanes like Cape Breton has?
Thank you for that question. So as I mentioned before, we have done a lot of work since Fiona to make sure that we are storm hardening our system. So those areas like Cape Breton that were hit the hardest, Pictou County was hit significantly as well. We've been focusing our storm hardening in those areas. So in addition to the vegetation management that we've been doing, we've also been moving more lines, more power lines that were in the woods out to the roadside to get them away from trees. We've been installing higher class poles, so larger, taller poles to be more resilient when we do have the high winds, and really making sure that all of the equipment that we have is as durable as possible. That will not eliminate outages. There will still be outages that occur from trees, but we're doing everything we can to reduce those, especially in those hardest hit areas. We're spending about 180 million this year on that work.
Did Nova Scotia Power take away any lessons from Fiona?
Yeah, there are a lot of lessons that we looked at. Obviously, deploying that many crews throughout the province was a huge undertaking. We worked very closely with our partners, EMO, and throughout the province. So those lines of communication are critically important to us. And we do that all year round, and making sure that when the storm hits, we're communicating as effectively with customers as well. Communication is a big learning for sure.
And just to clarify, you mentioned earlier you're still in the process of taking down storm weakened trees from Fiona. So does that raise the risk then if another storm hits, even though it might not be as severe as Fiona, with all those trees still standing, there might be?
It's a really good question. So those that we saw pose the greatest risk, the ones that were closest to the lines, we did address those with the 10,000 we've already cut, but we are looking at other areas that may have less weakened trees that we're moving as well. So there is still a risk, but the risk has been minimized.
And once again, Telile Community Television would like to thank Communications Nova Scotia for making this footage from the press conference of August 24th available to us for use on this edition of Roundtable. Over the next few minutes, we're going to look back at the aftershocks of Hurricane Fiona here in Richmond County and across the Strait area, and we're going to get some perspectives from people who are going to be able to share with you some ideas of how Richmond County prepares for hurricanes and other big weather systems, and what can be done if you're impacted by the damage that a hurricane or a major weather system can cause. In just a moment or two, you're going to hear from Richmond MLA Trevor Boudreau. But first of all, we're going to get some thoughts from Stephen Marcellus. This interview was conducted just a few weeks after Hurricane Fiona swept through Richmond County, and also just a month and a half after Stephen Marcellus took his position as Richmond County's new Emergency Services Coordinator. Now, some might call this great timing, or some might call it terrible timing that an emergency services coordinator takes his position just before a hurricane blows through. That being said, this was your chance to really work with the various parts of EMO across Richmond County. Can you describe what that weekend was like? I understand that you were manning a control center with the CAO of the county, Troy McCulloch, who himself is new to the position. So what was that atmosphere like for you?
There's nothing like getting your feet wet the first month.
Literally and figuratively, yes.
Yep. It, not to sound, that relieved, but, Richmond County, we fared not too bad when you look at all the devastation across the province and Cape Breton. The North Shore devastated, up in CBRM, same thing. We were very fortunate that it was very minimal. Power outages were probably our major concern. We did have a mobile home in town that unfortunately did lose its roof. So, we're working with residents on how we can assist them. The province, they more or less ran the show up in the CBRM. So, there was 3 meetings a day. Anything that came in to my office went up to them, and hopefully they were able to enact on it fairly quickly. There wasn't a lot in return coming back for follow-up. So I have to assume that everything went swimmingly. The power outages were, I think, somewhere around in between. I think it was Grand River and Lordwise. I think up in that area was sort of our big pocket. Every other area kind of just had, up to 5 to 20 kind of outages, at least going by the power map.
Now, is your office still working with anybody impacted by the storm, either directly or indirectly? You mentioned power outages. We're pretty much clear of that particular hurdle right now. Most residents that did have downed trees have been able to get those cleaned up. You spoke about the mobile home in Arichat. I know fundraising is going on for Janasta and Vincent Chesson at this point. Is your office active in working with any people at this point across the county in terms of general cleanup and assessing damage?
No, right now it's just on a case-by-case basis. Somebody reaches out where they need some assistance with the forms for the financial assistance. We have them here in the office. They're online, both on novascotia.ca as well as Richmond County. So everything is, as much as we can, we've made things available. And then if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to me.
So what did that whole experience teach you about the setup of emergency management here in Richmond County? Because, as I say, you were just a few weeks on the job. What do you take away from all of that?
When you think you're prepared, there's always something that comes up that kind of catches you off. So we were very good here where I had us prepared as best as I could. We didn't enact any comfort centers on a full-time basis. They're really just after the storm anyways. So yeah, it's just, kind of prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and, hopefully all your planning goes, and, if something comes up, just deal with it in real time and to the best of your abilities.
Now, I understand there were 22 different comfort centers set up. Did it surprise you that there was this much commitment to helping people through the storm through Richmond County, that there were as many as 22 different centers across a rural municipality?
With the community that I've interacted with, no surprise at all. The residents here are fantastic. The first responders that I've met, unfortunately, I haven't met them all, but the ones I have been fantastic. They've all been welcoming. The sense of community here is second to none. Everybody pitches in. There's a lot of stuff that I noticed driving around where, the residents just pitched in for one another. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm probably still not aware of.
So what happens now that we've cleared through Fiona? There's still some cleanup happening and some fundraising going on for the Chessons, as I mentioned. But now that we're through there, what are your priorities in terms of emergency management in the short term and the long term for Richmond County? What are some of the things you're hoping to do and hoping that you'll be able to see accomplished during your time here?
Well, because I was new, the communication between the departments and the key players up with the province, got to work through that on, the best communication methods for those folks and everybody involved. It wasn't terrible. Email, I find, isn't always the best because there's that lag time when you want to have an answer, especially for people in need. So it's just making sure that all the contact lists are up to date, and the key players are actually still in the roles that my sheets actually have them down as. Following up with any financial assistance if people need it, again, reach out to me, and then I'll get you sort of pointed in the right direction.
Is there anything you think the public might not understand about emergency management? And I mean, you mentioned you've had all your years working with different departments in Ontario. Is there a misconception about what emergency management does that you hope you'll be able to shine some light on, or even just something that in general people may not know about?
We don't have all the answers.
Yep.
I'd say that's probably the biggest misconception. Depending on the emergency, it's very, very dynamic and fluid on, you know, who's doing what, who's looking after what, and the resources that are coming. When you look at power, a lot of residents were reaching out in the first couple of days that, you know, Nova Scotia Power chopped trees down, but then, you know, they didn't affect anything over here, or they didn't chop down the whole tree. They have their plan. Be patient, and people will get to you. And when there's an emergency where you're calling 911 for whatever the issue is, just be patient with the responders that are coming. That's really my big takeaway from what went on with Fiona is the patient aspect. Just be patient. People are coming. People are working as hard as they can to do what they need to.
And we'd just like to let our viewers know that we're in the process of nailing down a follow-up interview with Emergency Services Coordinator for Richmond County, Stephen Marcellus. We hope to have that conversation for you shortly on Roundtable or Telile 24/7. Right now, we'd like to shift gears and get some perspective from Richmond MLA Trevor Boudreau. I conducted this interview with the PC MLA for Richmond shortly after Fiona swept through Richmond County last year. Here's some thoughts from MLA Boudreau about the impact of Fiona in Richmond County, but also about some programs that can be accessed from the provincial level if people do experience some damage from hurricanes or other large weather systems. Richmond County did not absorb the bulk of the damage that Hurricane Fiona did to Cape Breton Island, but there was some significant damage in terms of road washouts. There were downed trees in some communities. There was some flooding along roads, some structural damage. Overall, what were your thoughts on what was happening and where it goes from here?
I think it's important to note this was a significant storm impacting a whole number of Nova Scotians and people from all over the Maritimes and Atlantic Canada, for that matter. And certainly it appears that Richmond County has kind of escaped it with less damage than others. But don't kid yourself. There are certainly people who have felt the effects of it, whether it's flooded basements, a couple of homes that had roof damage and roofs ripped off, and certainly infrastructure damage to roads and other places here in Richmond County. So we felt the effects, but certainly not to the extent as other places close by.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's look at some of those issues that have come up over the course of Fiona, and they're still going to need repairs and remediation well beyond the period that we're in now. I want to focus specifically on a big road washout that has kind of become the symbol of Fiona in Richmond County. We've all seen the pictures. St. George's Channel, vehicle wound up at the bottom of that chasm. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. Obviously, that's on your radar. There was also a smaller washout near the Big Brook area of West Bay Road. Can you give me a bit of a sense on your general reaction to these and basically what can happen from here on in terms of getting them repaired?
Yeah, I thanks, Adam. I don't know about you, but I remember, on Saturday morning waking up, and one of the first things on social media I saw was that picture of I think it was a Toyota Tundra into that washed out culvert. And
yes,
certainly when you look at it, you're saying, how did somebody get out and walk out of there? And certainly very glad that nobody was significantly hurt. But we were. With that being the first thing I saw, I expected, a great deal of damage on the roads to be seen across Richmond. But luckily for us, I think, as you mentioned, that was one full washout. There was also a full washout in Oban as well on Morrison Road, and some other places where certainly the water came over the road, and there's some significant washout on the sides of roads in places. And so I've been in contact with the department even before the storm. I mean, the area manager, Sean O'Connor, and I were talking, early before the storm and during the storm and since. So, I was able to share a post with some discussions I had with Sean about how we're going to sort out some of these bigger issues and some timelines for those issues. So certainly washouts where people have detours that are significant are important things to get done as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. So you know, the moves that are happening hopefully this week and into the coming few weeks, will remediate those areas and certainly get those ones back up and running to you know, the best of their ability to make sure people can travel to and from safely. But with that being said, I'm sure we'll, you know, as we come along, there's probably some places that we'll find more damage later on, or where places where things are softer or a little more fragile going into the winter. And so, you know, I think my discussions with the department were saying, you know, let's make sure we're on top of those things and watching for those vulnerabilities throughout the year, because sometimes these weaken areas that could have had some problems later too.
Certainly so. I'm curious as well, Trevor. We're 9 days out from Fiona's main day of wreckage through Cape Breton Island, that being Saturday, of course, even though there were effects felt through the weekend. I imagine that when people were able to reach you through the outages of power and internet, that you were hearing your phone ringing off the hook, that you were getting constant streams of messages from people. What have people been reaching out to you about? Obviously, these roads that we've just discussed, but what else have you been hearing on the ground?
You know, people are really, there's a couple of different things. People are trying to be helpful and informative. So if they see something, so we've encouraged people that if you see a washout or if you see something with infrastructure in the county that could impact people's ability to travel safely, let us know. People have been reaching out with questions and concerns about some of their own personal challenges that they're having. So whether it's flooded basements or shingles off roof or leaks, that sort of thing. We're getting lots of calls in terms of how the government can help. And you know, the Premier announced some relief for different groups of people over, you know, that will be available through online, but also in our office. So our office has been getting a lot of calls in terms of the programs that we do have available for people for relief. So it's been a very busy week in terms of phone calls and emails for that. And our goal is to make sure we get the information to people. We help people that need help filling out those applications, but also, you know, making sure that people are informed so that they know what are their options as well.
Now, I don't want you to recite the full list of supports that have been made available by the provincial government, but I'm wondering, Trevor, if there are one or two that you'd really like to highlight that perhaps people might not be aware of. Are there any specific highlights from the supports being available that you'd like to shine a spotlight on?
Well, I think the ones that, in terms of the people of Richmond County, I think there's a couple that are quite helpful for many people. Anybody who lost power for up to 48 hours or for 48 hours can apply for $100 for the cost of spoiled food. So that one would be very useful for anybody that lost power over 48 hours. Anybody who had to have any tree removal, any tree damage, it's basically $250 to help with that cost. As you may know, or you probably absolutely know, we have a seniors care grant that started last year. It was originally $500. There was an extra $250 added for home heating, but then there's an additional $250 on top of that for the Fiona relief for the seniors care grant. If you've applied for the seniors care grant and you received it, you don't have to apply again. So this is a good news story for people. You don't have to reapply. And then for anybody on disability supports or income and assistance, there's programs there. Certainly there's support for people who can't return to their homes, and I know we have several of those in Richmond County. Not as many as probably in other places in the province, but we certainly have them. And that's that funds are going through the Red Cross for $1,000. And then really the big one for people who had significant damage that was uninsurable. So if you don't have if you have insurance and your insurance covers a certain portion but doesn't cover other components, then this relief is there for you as well. We're looking into the details of that a bit more as well. There are some other possibilities with that. So if people have questions, sometimes I don't have all the answers and we're trying to figure them out, but certainly reach out to us if you think you may be available or may be able to apply for that relief. Don't be afraid to ask. The worst thing we can say is we'll look into it and no, we can't, or maybe we look into it and we find out that we can help you. So I would encourage people, whether or not you know or you think you know, just reach out to our office and we can help navigate that.
All right. Well, we'll certainly do our part to connect people to your office and to the provincial offices and applications as well. Last question to you, Trevor. And we've seen the impact both here in Richmond County and in particular in the CBRM along the Cabot Trail, communities like Antigonish, New Glasgow, Pictou County, Truro, and of course the urban centers, Halifax, Dartmouth. There's a real sense of beaten but not broken for the parts of Nova Scotia that experienced Fiona. So I just wonder, what do you as a representative take away from all of this? And what do you and your family take away from all of this?
Well, look, I mean, it's no secret. I think the rest of Canada knows, and hopefully the rest of the world knows. We're a resilient bunch here in Nova Scotia, and we're very resourceful. We're very supportive of each other. We're very cooperative in nature, and so when an event like this happens, we do our best to support the people most affected, and even the people most affected are out there trying to help the other people who are just as affected. And so, it does show that resilience. It does show that we do care as a group, and that we as a province, and certainly Atlantic Canada for that matter. And so I was down driving on the St. Peter's Horseshoe Road to check out some of the damage there last week, and drive by 3 different utility trucks, all from 3 different provinces, one from Quebec, one from New Brunswick, and one from Nova Scotia. So just the help that we've been getting, I mean, it's been incredible, and we're very thankful to our neighbors for helping us. And I think what you can take out of it is we're all in this together, and we want to support each other. So that's what we do around here.
Very much so. Very much so. All right, we've covered a lot of ground in a short time, Trevor, as I thought we might. Did you want to add anything else about all this just before we wrap up?
No, I just want to thank. I do want to thank the residents of Richmond for their patience in all of this. I know when you lose power, or you have significant damage, and you're anxious and you're stressed, it's easy to become frustrated. But as a group, and as a community, and as a region, we've done really well to kind of do what we need to do to get through it. And like I said, we're very grateful to the frontline workers, those linesmen and people for getting us up and going again. So thank you to all of those who've been out there on the front lines. Thank you to those people who've been volunteering in those community centers. I know a lot of our volunteer fire departments opened up so that people had a place to go. I mean, the list goes on. And so you're always going to forget somebody, and I'm sure I have, but again, it takes a village, right? And certainly that's what we're lucky that we have here, is we have a community that cares, and it shows. So thank you to everybody.
Well, with 22 different comfort centers opened around Richmond County at the height of Fiona, we're certainly seeing caring communities and caring villages coming together. So we appreciate you contributing to the discussion and to the cleanup effort as well, Trevor, by giving us some time today. Thank you so much for joining me on Telile today.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
Few people in Richmond County were impacted more by Hurricane Fiona than Janasta and Vincent Chesson of Arichat. High winds from the hurricane blew the roof off their trailer that they had been living in for 20 years, having them wondering about where they would be able to live next. Well, the community rallied around them, and as you're going to see in this special field report that I prepared for Telile 24/7 just a few weeks after the hurricane, Isle Madame residents and people from far and wide got together to make sure that the Chessons would have a new place to live. Only 6 weeks ago, a home sat at this part of Highway 206 in Arichat. It was a home that housed Janasta and Vincent Chesson for 20 years. It was the home where they raised their son Jordan, and it was starting to become a home for Jordan's son, the Chessons' grandson. Hurricane Fiona had something to say about that in late September, blowing the roof off of the house and soaking its interior contents. So just a few days ago, that home was dismantled. However, according to Janasta Chesson's sister Jenny Party, the Chessons are a step closer to being able to reach their goal of a new home on the same site.
To be truthful, I'm always the optimistic person. I think where there's a problem, there's a solution. It's to find that solution, and I'm sure we will come up with something together, everybody together. I'm sure we will come up with something. I'm always the hopeful one.
So where does Jenny Party's optimism come from? Well, for starters, a GoFundMe campaign set up by Party's son Cody Party just a couple of days after the hurricane came through has raised over $16,800 for the Chessons. And just recently, on October the 15th, a day-long fundraiser at the Acadiaville Community Centre in West Arichat raised over $8,000 for the couple.
It was heartwarming. It really was. A community comes together in times of need, for sure. And you could see that on October 15th, certainly.
The support for Janasta and Vincent Chesson was overwhelming all through the day on October 15th in West Arichat, even though we're still in a pandemic, and that impacted the way people made their donations.
There was an inflow of people at the beginning, but I think we got a sense of, especially when people were coming in and just dropping money off in the donation box and scurrying back out the door. There's still, what we got out of it is there's still that fear of COVID in with large groups, and of course you have your vulnerable population that are still, and those were the older people were the ones that were kind of just coming in, dropping in the donation box and running back out. There was still that, you know, that threat of COVID, of course.
Even with these factors, it was still a successful fundraising day for the Chessons, making an impact not only on Janasta and Vincent Chesson, but on their son Jordan, who spent many years in the house that was destroyed by Hurricane Fiona in September.
He left this community after he got his trade in Port Hawkesbury. For him, it was kind of like a homecoming as well, and to feel the warmth of the community coming together to support, you know, his family, his parents.
Jordan Chesson's current hometown of New Glasgow also chipped into the fundraising efforts for the family, even though that town is hundreds of miles away from where Hurricane Fiona destroyed the Chessons' trailer in Arichat.
There was one a fundraiser in New Glasgow, which is where Janasta's son and wife and children live, and I believe that raised almost $500.
So, with just over $24,500 raised by communities and GoFundMe participants, where do the Chessons go from here? According to Janasta Chesson's sister Jenny Party, there is a plan in place, but it will require a lot of things to go right in the coming days and weeks.
And it's kind of daunting for the fact that the price of everything right now is kind of outrageous. So when you're looking at, as you can see here, they staked out an area behind me where my husband Kevin did up some plans for a small house of 14 by 28, and they were in the process of getting prices and like a price list to see how much it would cost, and it's still a bit over what was raised. Another option was they did go yesterday to see a small mini home in the Loosedale area, and the seller, it looks like he may be able to get within the budget that they do have. The big issue right now is the cost of having it taken from Loosedale to the Arichat area. So that's a big cost. That comes with a big price tag, like $10,000.
Further complicating things is that even though there has been such widespread community support for the Chessons, the couple is still feeling the emotion of losing their home of 20 years. Jenny Party recalls the day that the remnants of the trailer that they have called their home for 2 decades were finally torn down.
At this moment, I would say that it is still a bit overwhelming, but the day that they dismantled the trailer and took it out in dump trucks was a difficult day for them. It was definitely a difficult day. They're still feeling the support of the community, definitely, because they're still getting texts and messages of encouraging words and support. Right now, as I was saying, it's kind of overwhelming for them because there's so much. If you build, there's building codes, and and with the mini home that I mentioned, there's permits, and then there's how do you get it here. So they're still hopeful, but it is a bit overwhelming.
Despite all these factors, the Chessons are still grateful for the support of their own community and people far and wide, including anonymous donors to the GoFundMe page set up by nephew Cody Party in September.
It's just a matter of figuring it all out, I guess. They're trying to figure out what they can do. Not what they can't do, but what they can do.
Reporting in Arishat and West Arishat for Telile 24/7, I'm Adam Cook. And that concludes our special Hurricane Preparedness edition of Roundtable here on Telile Community Television. Thank you for tuning in, and a special thank you to Communications Nova Scotia once again for providing the footage from the Hurricane Preparedness media availability that took place on August 24th. If you have any thoughts about what you've seen over the past hour, or just suggestions for a future edition of Roundtable, feel free to contact me directly or to contact Telile Community Television in Arishat. And be sure to follow Telile on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and X, formerly known as Twitter. For now, I'm Adam Cook. Thank you once again for joining me on Roundtable this week. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you again next week with a brand new show. Bye for now.